The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the Bentonville, Arkansas station, just as the sun was climbing over the ridge, and Katherine Carson stumbled out with nothing but a battered leather suitcase and bruises hidden beneath her high-necked traveling dress. She had been running for 3 days straight, ever since she slipped out of her husband's St. Louis mansion in the dead of night, leaving behind everything except what she could carry. Her hands trembled as she gripped the handle of her suitcase, scanning the dusty street for any sign of pursuit. The year was 1878, and a woman traveling alone was already cause for gossip, but Katherine had learned that whispers were far less dangerous than Edmund Carson's fists. The morning air carried the scent of horses and wood smoke. Bentonville was smaller than she had imagined, just a handful of buildings clustered along a rutted main street. A general store, a saloon, what looked like a boarding house, and beyond that, rolling hills that stretched toward the horizon. She had chosen this place precisely because it was small, remote, far enough from St. Louis that Edmund might not think to look for her here. "You need help with that, madam?" Katherine turned sharply, her heart hammering. A tall man stood a few feet away, his hat tilted back to reveal a sun-weathered face and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He was perhaps 30 years old, with broad shoulders and work-worn hands that he held out in a gesture of peace. "I apologize if I startled you," he said, his voice low and careful. "Saw you step off the stage and thought you might need directions. I'm Thomas Tyler. I run a ranch about 5 miles east of here." Katherine's first instinct was to refuse, to keep moving, to trust no one. But exhaustion pulled at her bones, and something in Thomas Tyler's steady gaze made her pause. There was no calculation in his expression, no hint of the cruelty she had learned to recognize in Edmund's eyes. "Katherine," she said, then caught herself. Using her married name felt like dragging chains. Katherine Cole. It was her maiden name, the name she should never have given up. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Cole." He didn't correct her marital status, though she had said Miss instead of Mrs. "Are you expected somewhere in town?" "I was hoping to find work," she said, the words rushing out before she could stop them. "And lodging. I can cook clean, so. I worked as a governess before she stopped, aware she was saying too much." Thomas studied her for a moment, and Katherine had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through to all her secrets. But when he spoke, his tone remained gentle. "The boarding house is run by Mrs. Patterson. She is decent enough, though her rates are steep. As for work, you might try the general store, but I will tell you honestly that Bentonville does not have much call for governesses." Katherine's heart sank. She had $60 sewn into the lining of her suitcase, money she had saved coin by coin over 2 years of marriage. It would not last long. "However," Thomas continued, "I am in need of help at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Donnelly, passed away 2 months ago, and the place has fallen into disorder. I can offer room and board plus wages of $15 a month." It was a generous offer, perhaps too generous. Katherine's instincts screamed at her to be cautious, to refuse, to not put herself in the power of another man. But she was tired, so tired, and the thought of having a place to stay, away from town where Edmund's hired men might come looking, was almost too tempting to resist. "I would need to see the arrangements first," she said carefully. "The accommodations, I mean. Of course. I have a wagon just down the street. If you would like, I can drive you out to the ranch now, let you look around, and bring you back to town if it does not suit you." The practicality of the offer and the lack of pressure in his voice decided her. Katherine nodded. "All right." Thomas took her suitcase before she could protest, carrying it as though it weighed nothing. His wagon was a sturdy affair, built for work rather than comfort, and he helped her up onto the bench seat with a courtesy that felt genuine rather than performative. As they drove out of town, Katherine watched the landscape unfold around them. The hills were covered in oak and hickory, just beginning to show the first hints of autumn color. It was beautiful country, wild and open in a way that made her chest ache. She had grown up in Philadelphia in narrow streets hemmed by brick buildings, and even St. Louis had felt confined. This was different. This felt like breathing. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked, more to fill the silence than from genuine curiosity. 8 years. I bought the land with money I saved working cattle drives up to Kansas. It was raw land then, just grass and trees. I built the house and barn myself, with help from my brother. Thomas kept his eyes on the road as he spoke. He died 3 years ago. Fever took him one winter. "I am sorry," Katherine said, and meant it. "Thank you. He was a good man." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then continued. "Mrs. Donnelly came to help about a year after that. She was a widow, getting on in years, and needed work. She treated the place like it was her own, kept everything running smooth. I have been at loose ends since she passed." They crested a hill, and Katherine saw the ranch spread out below them. It was larger than she had expected, with a well-built house, a substantial barn, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and she could see horses in a corral near the barn. It looked prosperous, well-maintained despite Thomas's claims of disorder. The house itself was 2 stories, built of good timber with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. As they drew closer, Katherine could see that the windows were streaked with dust and the porch needed sweeping, but the bones of the place were solid. Thomas pulled the wagon up to the front steps and helped Katherine down. "Let me show you inside." The front door opened into a large main room that served as both kitchen and living space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a sturdy table stood in the center of the room. But Thomas had not been exaggerating about the state of things. Dishes were piled in a wash basin, dust covered every surface, and the floor needed scrubbing. "The bedroom is through there," Thomas said, pointing to a door on the far side of the room. It was Mrs. Donnelly's. It has a good bed, a wardrobe, and a window that catches the morning sun. "My room is upstairs, along with 2 other bedrooms that are mostly empty. There is a washroom out back with a pump." Katherine walked to the bedroom door and looked inside. The room was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed, and the window Thomas had mentioned looked out onto a vegetable garden that had gone to weeds. "I would expect you to keep the house," Thomas said, staying in the main room. "Cooking, cleaning, laundry. The garden needs work, but Mrs. Donnelly always kept it producing, and I would appreciate having vegetables again. Beyond that, your time would be your own. I am usually out working the ranch from dawn until supper time." "And you would expect nothing else?" Katherine asked, turning to face him. She needed to be clear, needed to know if there were expectations beyond housework. Thomas met her gaze steadily. "No, madam. I am offering employment, nothing more." Mrs. Donnelly had a lock on her bedroom door. It is still there, and the key is in the drawer of the bedside table. Something in Katherine's chest loosened slightly. She walked back into the main room, looking around again with new eyes. It was a mess, yes, but it was honest work. And more than that, it was away from St. Louis, away from Edmond, away from the life that had nearly killed her. "I will take the position," she said. "Are you certain?" "You do not want time to think it over." "I am certain." Thomas nodded. "Then let me bring in your suitcase and show you where things are kept. There is not much food in the house, but I can ride into town tomorrow for supplies. Tonight, we can make do with what is in the root cellar." He was true to his word, spending the next hour showing Katherine the layout of the house and outbuildings, where supplies were stored, how the pump worked, which chickens were the best layers. His manner was straightforward and businesslike, never crossing into the personal. When he finally headed out to work the ranch, Katherine was left alone with the overwhelming task of making the house livable again. She started with her own room, unpacking her meager belongings into the wardrobe. She had 3 dresses, a nightgown, a few undergarments, a pair of sturdy boots, and a small wooden box that contained her mother's wedding ring and a daguerreotype of her parents. That was all. Everything else she had owned was still in St. Louis, in the house that had been her prison. Katherine found the key in the bedside drawer, exactly where Thomas had said it would be. She locked the door from the inside, testing it, then unlocked it again. Just knowing it was there made her feel safer. By the time Thomas returned at sunset, Katherine had scrubbed the main room floor, washed all the dishes, and had a simple supper of bacon and beans cooking over the fire. Her back ached and her hands were raw, but the satisfaction of seeing the room clean was worth it. "It looks like a different place already," Thomas said, hanging his hat by the door. "I have not seen the floorboards that clean in months." "Tomorrow I will tackle upstairs," Katherine said, ladling beans onto 2 tin plates. "And I need to take inventory of what supplies we need from town." They ate in comfortable silence. Thomas had the table manners of someone who had been raised properly, but had spent too many years eating alone to maintain formality. When they finished, Katherine washed the dishes while Thomas sat at the table, mending a piece of tack by lamplight. "May I ask you something?" Thomas said after a while. Katherine tensed. "What is it? Those bruises on your wrists? The way you startled when I first spoke to you. You are running from something, are you not?" Katherine's hands stilled in the wash water. She should have known he had noticed. "Yes." "Is it the law?" "No, a man then." It was not really a question. Katherine turned to face him, her jaw set. "My husband, or rather, the man I am no longer married to as far as I am concerned. He is wealthy, well-connected in St. Louis and used to getting what he wants." Thomas set down the tack. "Is he likely to come looking for you here?" "I do not know. I tried to cover my tracks. I took a stage to Kansas City first, then another to Springfield, then here. But Edmund is nothing if not persistent." "If he does come, he will find that you are under my protection," Thomas said simply. "No man has a right to raise his hand to a woman, husband or not." The words, spoken so matter-of-factly, brought sudden tears to Katherine's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you. No thanks needed. Now, you have been working all day and you must be exhausted. Go on to bed. Morning comes early on a ranch." Katherine did as he suggested, grateful for the dismissal. In her small room, she changed into her nightgown and slipped between sheets that smelled of lavender. The bed was comfortable, the room was quiet, and for the first time in years she felt something close to safe. She woke to the sound of roosters crowing and soft gray light filtering through the window. For a confused moment, she did not know where she was, but then memory returned. The ranch. Thomas Tyler. Her new life. Katherine dressed quickly and emerged to find the main room empty. Through the window, she could see Thomas heading toward the barn. She built up the fire, set coffee to boil, and began preparing breakfast from the supplies she had found in the root cellar. By the time Thomas returned, she had bacon frying and was mixing batter for johnnycakes. "Something smells good," he said, pouring himself coffee. "I hope you like johnnycakes. There was cornmeal in the pantry, and I thought Mrs. Donnelly made johnnycakes," Thomas said, a note of nostalgia in his voice. "I have not had them since she passed. Thank you." They fell into an easy routine over the following days. Thomas would rise before dawn to tend the livestock. Katherine would prepare breakfast, and then he would head out to work the ranch while she tackled the house. The place had been more neglected than she initially realized. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, beat dust from curtains, and scoured every surface until the house gleamed. True to his word, Thomas rode into town for supplies, returning with flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, salt pork, and a dozen other staples. He also brought a newspaper from Little Rock, which Katherine read hungrily, searching for any mention of Edmund or a missing wife. There was nothing. As the days turned into weeks, Katherine found herself relaxing by increments. Thomas was a man of few words, but his presence was steady and reassuring. He never pried into her past, never made demands beyond the work she had been hired to do. In the evenings, they would sit at the table after supper, Thomas working on ranch accounts or mending equipment while Katherine sewed or read from the small collection of books that had belonged to Mrs. Donnelly. Sometimes they talked. Thomas told her about the ranch, about his childhood in Tennessee, about the decision to head west after the war. He had fought for the Union, though he spoke little of those years. His brother had fought alongside him, and they had decided together to start fresh in Arkansas, away from the devastation and bitterness that had consumed Tennessee. Katherine found herself sharing small pieces of her own story. Not the worst of it, not yet, but enough that Thomas began to understand who she had been before Edmund. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her father's bookshop, about her love of reading. Her parents had both died of cholera when she was 18, leaving her alone and penniless. Edmund had seemed like salvation then, a successful merchant offering marriage and security. She had not realized the price until it was too late. "You were young," Thomas said when she confessed how foolish she felt for marrying Edmund. "And alone. Any of us might have made the same choice." "But I should have seen how. Did he show you his true nature before you married him?" "No," Katherine admitted. "He was charming, attentive. It was not until after the wedding that he changed. Then you had no way of knowing. You cannot blame yourself for another man's cruelty." The absolution in his words made Katherine's throat tight. She had blamed herself for so long, believed Edmund when he told her she provoked his anger, that she deserved his punishment. Hearing Thomas say otherwise with such simple conviction began to shift something deep inside her. Autumn settled over the Arkansas hills in earnest. The leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and the air carried a crisp edge in the mornings. Katherine revived the vegetable garden, harvesting the last of the tomatoes and squash, pulling weeds and preparing the soil for winter. She also began to explore the ranch, walking the paths Thomas had shown her, learning the lay of the land. One afternoon, she was returning from checking the henhouse when she saw a rider approaching from the direction of town. Her first instinct was panic, but as the rider drew closer, she saw it was not Edmund or anyone who looked like one of his men. It was a young man, perhaps 20, with a badge pinned to his vest. "Afternoon, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "I am Deputy Sheriff Mitchell. Is Mr. Tyler around?" "He is checking the fence lines in the north pasture," Katherine said, her heart still racing. "Can I help you with something?" "Just wanted to let him know there have been reports of cattle rustlers working the area. 3 ranches hit in the past month. Mr. Tyler should keep an eye on his herd." "I will tell him as soon as he returns." The deputy nodded, his gaze curious. "Are you the new housekeeper I heard about?" "Yes, Katherine Cole." "Well, Miss Cole, welcome to Bentonville. If you or Mr. Tyler see anything suspicious, send word to town right away." After the deputy left, Katherine found she was shaking. The fear that Edmund had found her was still so close to the surface, ready to surge up at any provocation. She forced herself to take deep breaths, to focus on the real concern, which was cattle rustlers, not her past. When Thomas returned that evening, she relayed the deputy's warning. "I heard rumors in town last week," Thomas said, frowning. "I was hoping they would move on, but it seems they are getting bolder. I will need to keep closer watch on the herd. Is there anything I can do to help?" "Keep the rifle by the back door loaded. If you see riders approaching that you do not recognize, get inside and bar the door. I do not expect trouble here at the house, but better to be cautious." The rifle, a Winchester repeater, had been sitting in the corner by the back door since Katherine arrived. She had never fired a gun in her life, but the next morning, Thomas took her out behind the barn and taught her how to load, aim, and shoot. The recoil startled her the first time, but by the end of the lesson, she could hit a tin can at 20 paces. "You are a quick learner," Thomas said, genuine approval in his voice. "I am discovering I can do a lot of things I never thought possible," Katherine replied. That night, lying in bed, she thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. In St. Louis, she had been decorative, helpless, trapped. Here, she was learning to shoot, to tend a garden, to manage a household in the middle of nowhere. She was learning that she was stronger than she had ever believed. As October gave way to November, Katherine and Thomas continued their quiet partnership. She found herself watching him more often, noticing the way he moved with easy confidence, the way his rare smiles lit up his face, the gentleness with which he treated the animals in his care. He was nothing like Edmund. Where her husband had been volatile and cruel, Thomas was steady and kind. Where Edmund had sought to control and diminish her, Thomas seemed content to let her simply be. Katherine caught herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what it would be like to have chosen a man like Thomas from the start. But she pushed those thoughts away. She was his employee, nothing more, and after Edmund, she was not sure she ever wanted to belong to another man again. Then came the day that changed everything. Katherine was in the house, preparing supper, when she heard riders approaching. Through the window, she saw 3 men on horseback, and her blood turned to ice. She recognized the man in the lead. It was Edmund's cousin, Gerald Carson, who had always watched her with cold, calculating eyes. She grabbed the rifle and barred the front door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the bolt. Thomas was out with the cattle, too far away to hear if she called for help. She was alone. The riders stopped in front of the house. "Katherine," Gerald shouted, "we know you are in there. Come out now and this will go easy." She said nothing, pressing herself against the wall beside the window, the rifle clutched in her hands. "Edmund sent us to bring you home. You are his wife, Katherine. You belong to him. Now stop this nonsense and come out." "No." Katherine shouted back, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I am not going back. Tell Edmund I would rather die than spend another day under his roof. You do not get a choice. He has every legal right to you." "I have a rifle," Katherine said, "and I know how to use it. If you try to come in here, I will shoot." There was a pause, then she heard Gerald's harsh laugh. "You always were more trouble than you were worth. Boys, kick in that door." Katherine raised the rifle, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had never shot at a person before, but she would do it if she had to. She would not go back, but before the men could dismount, she heard the thunder of hooves and Thomas's voice, sharp with authority. "That is far enough." Katherine risked a glance out the window. Thomas sat astride his horse, his own rifle raised and pointed at Gerald. His face was harder than she had ever seen it, all the gentleness gone. "This is none of your concern," Gerald said. "That woman is my cousin's wife. We are taking her home." "The woman in that house is under my protection," Thomas replied. "And she has made it clear she does not want to go with you, so I suggest you turn around and ride back to wherever you came from. You are making a mistake, friend. Edmund Carson is a powerful man. He will make you regret this." I have faced worse than Edmund Carson. Now get off my land." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Katherine held her breath, the rifle heavy in her hands. Then Gerald wheeled his horse around, motioning for the other two men to follow. "This is not over," he called back. "Edmund will come for her himself if he has to." "Let him try," Thomas said. The three riders galloped away, and Katherine sagged against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. She set the rifle down and fumbled with the bar on the door, needing to get outside, needing to see Thomas to thank him. He was dismounting as she stumbled out onto the porch. Without thinking, she ran to him, and he caught her as she collapsed against his chest, shaking with reaction. "You are safe," Thomas said, his arms strong around her. "They are gone. They will come back, or Edmund will come himself. He will never let me go. Then we will deal with that when it happens. But Katherine, you need to understand something." Thomas pulled back slightly, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes intense. "I will not let him take you. Not now, not ever. Do you hear me?" "Why?" the word broke from her. "Why would you risk so much for me?" Thomas's expression softened. "Because somewhere along the way you stopped being just my housekeeper. I care about you, Katherine, more than I should, probably. But there it is." Katherine stared at him, her heart racing for an entirely different reason now. "Thomas, you do not need to say anything. I know you have been through hell, and the last thing you need is another man making demands. I just wanted you to know that you are not alone in this." But Katherine found she did want to say something. The words had been building inside her for weeks, unacknowledged until this moment. "I care about you too. I think I have for a while now, but I am so afraid. Of Edmund, yes, but also of what it means to let someone close again. I understand that. And I am not asking for anything from you, Katherine. Just let me stand between you and the man who hurt you. Let me protect you. That is not fair to you. Let me worry about what is fair to me." They stood there in the fading afternoon light, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, Thomas raised one hand and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was so tender, so different from any touch Edmund had ever given her, that Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "We should go inside," she said, her voice unsteady. "It will be dark soon." That night, they sat at the table long after supper was finished, talking in a way they never had before. Thomas told her about the loneliness of running the ranch alone, about how he had watched other men marry and start families while he remained solitary. Katherine told him about the worst of Edmund's rages, about the times she had hidden bruises under long sleeves and high collars, about the suffocating fear that had become her constant companion. "I used to think it was my fault," she said. "Edmund would tell me that I made him angry, that if I just tried harder to please him, he would not have to discipline me. And I believed him." "It was never your fault," Thomas said fiercely. "A man who raises his hand to a woman is a coward, and nothing she does or does not do justifies it. I know that now. Being here, living without that constant fear, it has helped me see things clearly. But Thomas, I am still legally married to him. Even if I never go back, even if I stay here forever, I am still his wife in the eyes of the law. The law is not always right. And there are ways around it. You could file for divorce." "On what grounds? Even if I told a judge about the violence, Edmund would deny it, and who would believe me over him? He is respected, wealthy. I am nobody." "You are not nobody," Thomas said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You are brave and strong, and you deserve better than what he gave you." Katherine looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his calloused fingers and her own work-roughened ones. "What if he does come back? What if he brings the law with him, claims I am a runaway wife? Then we will figure it out together. I promise you, Katherine, I will not let him drag you back to St. Louis." The conviction in his voice made her believe him. For the first time since leaving Edmond, Katherine allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build a new life here. That maybe she did not have to keep running forever. Over the following weeks, Thomas took extra precautions. He hired 2 ranch hands from town, young men who could help with the cattle and also keep watch for trouble. He also rode into Bentonville and spoke with Deputy Mitchell, explaining the situation without going into details. The deputy agreed to keep an eye out for strangers asking questions about Katherine. As for Katherine herself, she found her feelings for Thomas growing deeper with each passing day. It was different from what she had felt for Edmond in the beginning. With Edmond, there had been the flush of infatuation, the heady feeling of being pursued by a successful man. With Thomas, it was something quieter but far more solid. It was the way he remembered that she liked her coffee with just a little sugar. The way he always hung his coat on the same peg so she knew where to find it when she brushed the dust off. The way he would leave wildflowers on the kitchen table, picked during his rides around the ranch. One evening in late November, as they sat by the fire after supper, Thomas looked up from the accounts he was working on. "Katherine, there is something I want to ask you." "What is it?" "Thanksgiving is next week. There is a church social in town, a community dinner. I usually go, though I confess it has been lonely the past few years. I wondered if you might like to come with me." Katherine's first instinct was to refuse, to stay hidden at the ranch, but she was tired of hiding, tired of letting fear dictate her choices. "I would like that." Thomas's smile was like sunrise. "Good. That is good." The night of the social, Katherine wore her best dress, a dark green wool that brought out the auburn in her hair. Thomas had shaved and put on a clean shirt, and when he helped her up into the wagon, his hand lingered on hers just a moment longer than necessary. The church was warm and crowded, filled with families, and the smell of roasting turkey and pumpkin pie. Katherine felt conspicuous at first, aware of the curious glances thrown her way, but Thomas stayed close, introducing her as his housekeeper to anyone who asked. Most people were friendly, welcoming her to the community without prying into her past. They filled their plates and found seats at one of the long tables. Katherine was laughing at something Thomas had said when she looked up and saw Deputy Mitchell approaching with a woman on his arm. "Evening, Thomas, Miss Cole. I wanted to introduce my wife, Sarah." "Sarah, this is the new housekeeper I told you about." Sarah Mitchell was a pleasant-faced woman in her 30s with a warm smile. "It is so nice to meet you, Katherine. May I call you Katherine? We do not stand on much ceremony out here, of course. I heard you came from back east. St. Louis, was it?" Katherine's smile froze, but Thomas stepped in smoothly. "Philadelphia originally, though she spent some time in St. Louis before coming here." "Well, we are glad to have you in Bentonville. If you ever need anything or just want company, please come call on me. It can be lonely out on the ranches, especially for us women." The offer seemed genuine, and Katherine found herself warming to Sarah. They chatted for a few minutes before the Mitchells moved on to greet other friends. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked quietly. "Yes." "I just panicked for a moment when she mentioned St. Louis. No one here knows the details of your past, and no one needs to. As far as Bentonville is concerned, you are Katherine Cole, my housekeeper, and that is all they need to know." The evening passed pleasantly. There was music after dinner, a fiddler and a man with a guitar playing lively tunes. Several people danced, and Thomas surprised Katherine by asking her to join them. "I did not know you could dance," she said as he led her through a simple reel. "My mother insisted my brother and I learn when we were boys. Said it was part of being a gentleman." Katherine had not danced since her wedding, and the joy of it, the simple pleasure of moving to music with Thomas's hand warm in hers, made her feel light and young. When the dance ended, they were both laughing and slightly breathless on the ride home. Katherine found herself leaning against Thomas's shoulder, tired but content. The night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be happy." "You deserve to be happy, Katherine. Every day." When they reached the ranch, Thomas helped her down from the wagon and they stood there in the moonlight, neither quite ready to go inside. "Katherine," Thomas said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know there is no pressure behind it. But I cannot keep quiet any longer. I am in love with you. I have been for weeks now. You do not need to say anything back, and it will not change anything between us if you do not feel the same. I just needed you to know." Katherine's breath caught. She had known her feelings for Thomas ran deep, but hearing him say he loved her was overwhelming. All the walls she had built around her heart trembled. "I love you too," she whispered. "But Thomas, I am so afraid. Edmund is still out there, and I am still legally his wife. We can figure out the practicalities. But right now, in this moment, just know that I love you, and I will wait however long it takes for you to feel safe enough to move forward." Katherine reached up and touched his face, her palm against his cheek. "You are the best man I have ever known." Thomas turned his head and kissed her palm, a gesture so tender it made her ache. Then, slowly, he lowered his head and kissed her lips. It was gentle, questioning, nothing like Edmund's demanding kisses. Katherine leaned into it, her hands gripping his jacket, pouring all her hope and fear and love into that single moment of connection. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were trembling. "I should go in," Katherine said, though she made no move to leave. "Yes, it is late." But they stood there a moment longer, reluctant to break the spell. Finally, Katherine forced herself to step back. "Good night, Thomas." "Good night, Katherine." She went to her room feeling as though she were walking on air, her heart full to bursting. She loved Thomas Tyler and he loved her. It should have been simple, but nothing in her life had ever been simple. Still, for tonight, she would let herself be happy. Winter settled over the ranch in earnest. Snow fell, dusting the hills in white, and Thomas had to break ice on the water troughs each morning. Katherine kept the house warm and cozy, baking bread and simmering stews, darning socks and mending shirts. They fell into an even deeper intimacy, though they were careful not to cross certain lines. Thomas would kiss her good night, would hold her hand as they sat by the fire, but he never pushed for more. He seemed to understand that she needed time, needed to heal. Christmas came, quiet and peaceful. Katherine made an apple pie with the last of the dried apples, and Thomas gave her a beautiful shawl he had bought from a woman in town who did weaving. Katherine gave him a new shirt she had sewn, with careful stitches and pearl buttons she had saved for. "It fits perfectly," Thomas said, his eyes soft. "Thank you. Thank you for the shawl. It is lovely." They spent Christmas evening reading by the fire, Katherine's feet tucked under her on the sofa, Thomas in the armchair with a book of poems. It was the most peaceful Christmas Katherine could remember, unmarred by Edmund's mercurial moods or the tension that had always filled their house during the holidays. But their peace was not to last. In early January, Edmund himself came to Bentonville. Katherine saw him first. She had ridden into town with Thomas to get supplies, and they were loading sacks of flour into the wagon when a familiar voice made her freeze. "Katherine," she turned slowly. Edmund stood on the boardwalk across the street, dressed in an expensive suit that looked absurdly out of place in rough Bentonville. He was still handsome, with his dark hair and aristocratic features, but Katherine saw only the cruelty in his eyes. "Leave her alone, Carson," Thomas said, moving to stand beside Katherine. "So this is the rancher you ran away with," Edmund said, looking Thomas up and down with obvious disdain. "I should have known. You always did have low tastes, Katherine." "I did not run away with anyone. I left you because you are a monster. Watch your tongue. You are still my wife and you will show respect." "The hell she will," Thomas growled. "She told you she is not going back and I am telling you the same. Now leave before this gets ugly." Edmund smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I am afraid I cannot do that. You see, I have been speaking with the local sheriff. Explained how my poor, unstable wife fled from my care, how I have been searching for her for months, desperate to make sure she is all right. He was very sympathetic. In fact, he agreed that as her legal husband, I have every right to take her home." Catherine's blood ran cold. "No, no, I will not go. You do not have a choice, my dear. The law is on my side." Deputy Mitchell appeared from the sheriff's office looking uncomfortable. "Miss Cole, I am sorry, but Mr. Carson is correct. As your husband, he has the legal right to take you back to St. Louis. Unless you can show cause for a divorce, there is nothing I can do." "She is covered in scars from where he beat her," Thomas said, his voice shaking with fury. "Is that not cause enough? Can you prove Mr. Carson was responsible?" the deputy asked. "Of course he cannot," Edmund said smoothly. "Katherine has always been clumsy. I have spent our entire marriage caring for her, making excuses for her accidents. It grieves me that she has convinced this man that I am somehow to blame for her mishaps." It was so absurd, so blatantly false, but Katherine could see the deputy wavering. Edmund was well-dressed, well-spoken, clearly a man of means. Thomas was just a rancher and she was just a runaway wife. "I will not go," Katherine said, her voice steady despite her terror. "You can drag me to your carriage, Edmund, but I will fight you every step of the way. I will scream and tell everyone who will listen what you really are. Then you will look like a madwoman, and I will have even more cause to take you home and see you properly cared for." Edmund stepped down from the boardwalk, moving toward her. "Now be a good girl and come along quietly." Thomas moved to block him, but the deputy stepped between them. "Mr. Tyler, do not make this worse. The law is clear." "Then the law is wrong," Thomas said. Katherine felt numb, her mind racing. She had known this might happen, but facing it in reality was different. Edmund was going to win. He was going to drag her back to St. Louis, and everything she had built here would be destroyed. Then a voice called out from down the street. "Hold on just a minute." Everyone turned. An older woman was marching toward them, her face set with determination. Katherine recognized her as Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house. Behind her came Sarah Mitchell, and behind her a dozen other townspeople. "What is going on here?" Mrs. Patterson demanded. "This is a private matter," Edmund said coldly. "It does not concern you. When a member of our community is being threatened, it concerns all of us, Mrs. Patterson replied. "Now, Katherine, do you want to go with this man?" "No," Katherine said. "He is my husband, but he hurt me. For 2 years he beat me and I finally escaped. I will not go back." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward. "If what Katherine says is true, then she should not be forced to return." "She is lying," Edmund said, his composure slipping. "She is my wife and she is unstable. I am trying to help her." "Then why does she have scars?" Thomas demanded. "Why did she run away with nothing but a suitcase? Why is she terrified of you?" "I do not have to explain myself to a bunch of ignorant backwater farmers," Edmund snapped. "Deputy, I demand you enforce the law." The deputy looked at the crowd, then at Katherine, then at Edmund. Katherine could see the struggle on his face. Finally, he sighed. "Mr. Carson, technically you are right. You do have the law on your side. But I will tell you plainly, if you try to take Miss Cole by force, you will have to go through this entire town to do it. And I am not sure I would stop them." "This is outrageous," Edmund sputtered. "I will go to the territorial court. I will have all of you arrested for interfering." "You do that," Mrs. Patterson said. "But in the meantime, Katherine stays here." Edmund looked around at the sea of hostile faces, and Katherine saw the moment he realized he was beaten. His face twisted with rage, and for a moment she thought he might lash out. But then he got control of himself. "This is not over, Katherine. I will be back with proper legal authority, and then nothing will stop me from taking you home. You are my wife. You will always be my wife." He turned and stalked away, climbing into a carriage that waited at the end of the street. As it rolled away, Katherine felt her knees give out. Thomas caught her, holding her upright. "It is all right," he murmured. "You are safe." "He will come back," Katherine said. "He meant what he said. He will go to the courts and he will win." "Then we will find another way," Sarah Mitchell said, coming to stand beside them. "Katherine, have you considered filing for divorce yourself? My uncle is a judge in Little Rock. If you had grounds, he might grant it." "What grounds?" "I have no proof of anything Edmund did." "You have the testimony of this entire town," Mrs. Patterson said. "We all just heard you say he beat you. That would be enough for most judges. But it would take months, and Edmund will not wait that long." Thomas was very quiet, his face thoughtful. Then he said, "There is another option. It is not ideal, but it might work." "What?" "If you were widowed, you would be free. And if Edmund were to have an accident somewhere between here and St. Louis—" "No," Katherine said immediately. "I will not have you become a murderer on my behalf." "I was not suggesting we kill him," Thomas said. "Just that we might convince him it would be healthier for him to stay away." "How?" But before Thomas could answer, a young boy came running up. "Mr. Tyler, there is trouble at your ranch. One of the hands sent me to find you. Said some men are setting fire to your barn." Thomas swore and ran for the wagon. Katherine scrambled up beside him, and they raced back toward the ranch, fear clutching at her heart. Edmund had not left town after all. He was striking back in the cruelest way he knew, hurting Thomas because Thomas had protected her. By the time they reached the ranch, smoke was billowing into the sky. The barn was fully engulfed, and Katherine could hear the terrified screams of the horses trapped inside. The two ranch hands were frantically throwing buckets of water on the flames, but it was clear the barn was lost. Thomas leaped from the wagon and ran toward the burning structure. "The horses! We have to get the horses out." Katherine followed, pulling her shawl over her face to protect from the smoke. Together with the ranch hands, they managed to open the barn doors and drive the panicked horses out into the corral. The heat was intense, and Katherine's eyes were streaming with tears from the smoke. One of the horses, a young mare, balked at the door, too frightened to move. Thomas ran in after her, and Katherine's heart stopped. Thomas, no. But he was already inside. Long, terrible seconds passed. Then Thomas emerged, leading the mare, his face black with soot. He collapsed in the dirt, coughing, and Katherine ran to him. "You fool," she said, tears running down her face. "You could have been killed." "Could not let her burn," Thomas rasped. They watched as the barn collapsed in on itself, sending up a shower of sparks. All of Thomas's hay, his stored feed, his equipment, everything was destroyed. The financial loss was staggering. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Billy, approached. "Mr. Tyler, I saw the men who did this. There were 3 of them, rode up bold as brass and threw torches. I tried to stop them, but they had guns." "Did you recognize them?" "No, sir, but I heard one of them say something about sending a message." "Edmund," Katherine said, the name bitter on her tongue. "He did this because of me." "No," Thomas said, gripping her hand. "He did this because he is a vindictive bastard. But he made a mistake. He gave us proof of his character." By the time they returned to town the next morning, word of the fire had spread. Deputy Mitchell met them at his office, his face grave. "I heard about your barn, Thomas. I am sorry." "Edmund Carson is responsible," Thomas said. "He did it to punish Katherine." "Can you prove it?" "My ranch hand saw 3 men set the fire. The same 3 men who came to my ranch weeks ago claiming to be taking Katherine back to St. Louis." The deputy rubbed his face. "I believe you, Thomas. But proving it in a court of law is another matter. Carson is already back in Little Rock from what I hear. Claims he left Bentonville yesterday afternoon, hours before the fire." "Of course he has an alibi," Katherine said bitterly. "He is always careful to cover his tracks." "There has to be something we can do," Thomas said. "There is," Sarah Mitchell said, entering the office. "I sent a telegram to my uncle last night, told him the whole story. He wired back this morning. Katherine, if you can get to Little Rock and testify before him, he will grant you a divorce on grounds of cruelty." Katherine's heart leaped. "Truly?" "Yes, it is irregular, but he is willing to do it. You would need witnesses to corroborate your testimony, but given what happened at your ranch, Thomas and the others here in Bentonville should be sufficient." "When can we go?" "As soon as possible. My uncle said he will make time in his schedule, but you need to get there before Edmund can interfere." They left for Little Rock the next day, Katherine and Thomas traveling together in the wagon. The journey took 3 days, and they spent the nights in small inns along the way. Thomas was a perfect gentleman, always securing separate rooms, never pressing his advantage despite the intimacy of being alone together on the road. In Little Rock, they met with Judge Henry Morrison, Sarah's uncle, a dignified man in his 60s with kind eyes. He listened carefully as Katherine told her story, her voice steady despite the pain of reliving those 2 years with Edmund. Thomas testified about the day Edmund's men came to the ranch, about the fire, about the fear he had seen in Katherine's eyes. Judge Morrison also interviewed the deputy from Bentonville, who had traveled to Little Rock to provide testimony, and several of the townspeople who had witnessed the confrontation on the street. At the end of it all, the judge folded his hands and looked at Katherine. "Mrs. Carson, I am satisfied that you have been grievously wronged by your husband. I am granting your petition for divorce on the grounds of extreme cruelty. As of this moment, your marriage to Edmund Carson is dissolved." Katherine felt as though she might faint. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Thank you so much. I am also issuing a restraining order against Mr. Carson. If he attempts to contact you or come near you, he will be arrested. I will make sure word of this reaches St. Louis." Outside the courthouse, Katherine stood in the winter sunshine, free for the first time in years. Thomas stood beside her, a smile on his face. "You did it," he said. "You are free." "We did it," Katherine corrected. "I could never have done this without you." Thomas took her hands in his. "Katherine Cole, I know this has all been overwhelming, and the last thing you probably want is to jump into anything new. But I need to ask you something, and I want you to know there is no wrong answer." "What is it? Will you marry me?" "Not now, not until you are ready. But someday, when you have had time to heal and breathe and remember who you are without any man defining you. Will you marry me?" Katherine looked up at this good, steady man who had saved her in every way that mattered. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Thomas Tyler, I will marry you." He kissed her then, right there on the steps of the courthouse, and Katherine felt as though she were finally, truly home. They returned to Bentonville as the first signs of spring were appearing. Thomas threw himself into rebuilding the barn, and Katherine helped however she could, bringing water to the workers, preparing meals, holding boards in place while Thomas hammered. The community rallied around them, neighbors coming to help with the construction, donating lumber and labor. In April, Katherine and Thomas were married in the little church in Bentonville, with half the town in attendance. Katherine wore a simple white dress that Sarah had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers picked from the hills around the ranch. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Thomas kissed her, Katherine felt tears of joy streaming down her face. That night, in the bedroom they now shared, Thomas was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Katherine felt safe and loved. It was nothing like her wedding night with Edmund had been. There was no pain, no fear, only tenderness and growing pleasure as they learned each other's bodies. Afterward they lay tangled together, Thomas's arm around her shoulders, Katherine's head on his chest. "I love you," she said. "I do not think I have ever been this happy." "I love you too. And this is just the beginning, Katherine. We have the rest of our lives ahead of us." The years that followed were good ones. They worked the ranch together, building it into one of the most prosperous in the area. Katherine proved to have a good head for business, keeping the accounts and managing the sale of cattle. Thomas expanded their herd and began breeding horses as well. In the spring of 1880, Katherine gave birth to their first child, a boy they named James, after Thomas's brother. He had his father's creek water eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. Katherine discovered that motherhood suited her, though it was harder work than she had ever imagined. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, Rebecca, with red hair like Katherine's and Thomas's steady temperament. The house that had once been so quiet was now filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing, with the warmth of family. Katherine sometimes thought about Edmund, wondered what had become of him. She heard through letters from Sarah that he had remarried quickly after the divorce, some young woman from a wealthy St. Louis family. Katherine pitied her, hoped that perhaps Edmund had learned something, though she doubted it, but he was no longer her concern. That part of her life was over, a closed chapter. Instead, she focused on the present, on the life she had built with Thomas. They grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. Thomas's hair began to silver at the temples, and Katherine found lines appearing at the corners of her eyes, but they were laugh lines now, not the furrows of fear and worry that had marked her during her first marriage. In 1885, when James was 5 and Rebecca 3, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to twins, 2 more boys they named Samuel and David. The house was chaotic now, always full of noise and energy, but Katherine thrived in it. This was the family she had always wanted, the love she had always dreamed of. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Katherine on a picnic to a spot overlooking the ranch. From there, they could see everything they had built together. The house, now expanded to accommodate their growing family, the new barn, bigger and sturdier than the one that had burned, the cattle grazing in green pastures, the horses running in the corral. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Staying here, marrying me, all of it?" Katherine looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? Thomas, you saved my life. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. How could I possibly regret any of it? I just want to make sure you are happy." "I am happier than I ever dreamed possible. You know, when I stepped off that stagecoach in Bentonville with nothing but a suitcase, I thought I was running away from something. But I was really running toward something. Toward you, toward this life. I just did not know it yet." Thomas kissed her temple. "I am glad you never repacked that suitcase. So am I." As the sun set over the Arkansas hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Katherine leaned against her husband and thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had fled from violence and cruelty with just a suitcase, terrified and alone. And she had found a man who helped her unpack, who gave her a place to belong, who showed her what love was supposed to be. The years continued to pass. each one bringing new challenges and new joys. James grew into a young man who was passionate about ranching, who wanted nothing more than to take over the operation someday. Rebecca proved to be brilliant with numbers, taking over the accounts from Katherine when she was just 12 years old. Samuel and David were inseparable, always getting into trouble together but with good hearts. In 1895, Katherine and Thomas celebrated their 20th anniversary. James was now 15, already as tall as his father, and beginning to court a girl from town. Rebecca was 13, more interested in books than boys, much to Katherine's amusement. The twins were 10, wild and rambunctious, but starting to settle into the work of the ranch. That summer, Thomas took Katherine to San Francisco for a delayed honeymoon. They had never traveled for pleasure before, always too busy with the ranch and the children. But with James old enough to oversee things, and Rebecca mature enough to manage the household, they took 2 weeks for themselves. It was a revelation. Katherine had never seen the ocean before, and standing on the beach with waves crashing at her feet, she felt the last shadows of her past finally wash away. She was 42 years old, and she had never felt more alive, more free. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, coming to stand beside her. "About how far we have come, about how grateful I am." "I am the grateful one. You took a chance on a lonely rancher and you made his life worth living." "We made each other's lives worth living," Katherine corrected. They returned to Arkansas refreshed and ready to dive back into their busy life. The ranch continued to prosper, and Thomas began teaching James the finer points of cattle breeding and land management. Katherine started a small school in town, teaching reading and arithmetic to the local children 2 days a week. She found she loved teaching, loved opening up the world of books to young minds. In 1900, James married his sweetheart, Emily, and brought her to live at the ranch. Katherine was thrilled to have another woman in the house, and she and Emily quickly became close. The following year, Emily gave birth to a daughter, making Katherine and Thomas grandparents. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Katherine marveled at the fullness of her life. This tiny, perfect baby was proof that good things could come from the ashes of the past. She thought about the young woman she had been, fleeing St. Louis with just a suitcase, and she wished she could go back and tell her younger self that everything would be all right. That she would find love, real love, and build a family, and know peace. Rebecca left for college in Little Rock in 1902, one of the first women in the area to pursue higher education. Katherine was immensely proud, even as she missed her daughter terribly. The twins were 17 now, both courting girls from neighboring ranches, and the house that had once been so full of children was beginning to empty. "It is strange, is it not?" Katherine said to Thomas one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "For so many years we could not get a moment's peace with all the children underfoot, and now I find myself missing the chaos." "That is the way of things," Thomas said, taking her hand. "We raise them to leave us, but they will come back, bring their own children. The circle continues." He was right. Over the next decade, all their children married and started families of their own. James and Emily had 4 children and took over the daily running of the ranch. Rebecca married a lawyer in Little Rock but visited often with her 2 children. Samuel and David both settled on neighboring ranches with their wives, staying close to family. Katherine and Thomas stepped back from the hard work of ranching, content to play with their grandchildren and offer advice when asked. They had become the patriarch and matriarch of a large, loving family, and their home was always full of visitors, of laughter, of life. In 1915, Thomas fell ill with pneumonia. Katherine nursed him through it, sitting by his bedside day and night, refusing to leave him. He recovered, but the illness took something from him, left him frailer than before. He was 65 years old, and for the first time, Katherine had to face the reality that their time together was not infinite. "I am not ready to lose you," she told him one night, tears in her eyes. "You are not going to lose me for a long time yet," Thomas replied, though they both knew it was probably not true. "And when the time comes, remember that every day we had together was a gift. We built a good life, Katherine, a life worth living." But Thomas proved more resilient than the doctors expected. He recovered his strength slowly, and though he was never quite the same, he had several more good years. He dandled his great-grandchildren on his knee, watched James turn the ranch into one of the most successful in Arkansas, and spent long evenings with Katherine, talking about everything and nothing. In the spring of 1921, Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep, Katherine beside him. He was 71 years old. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county, a testament to the respect and affection he had earned over a lifetime. Katherine mourned him deeply, but she did not fall apart. She had learned long ago that she was stronger than she thought. She continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, finding comfort in family and in the legacy she and Thomas had built together. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and look out over the land they had worked together, and she would talk to Thomas as though he were still there. She told him about the grandchildren's accomplishments, about James's latest success with the cattle, about Rebecca's daughter who had just become a teacher herself. And she thanked him, over and over, for seeing her that day in Bentonville, for offering her work, for helping her unpack her suitcase and build a home. Katherine lived to be 87 years old, sharp-minded and active until the very end. When she passed away in 1936, surrounded by 3 generations of her family, her last words were, "Tell Thomas I am coming home." She was buried next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and at the funeral, James stood before the gathered crowd and told the story of how his parents had met. He told of a young woman fleeing with just a suitcase and a rancher who helped her unpack and never repack again. He told of a love built on respect and kindness, of a partnership that had weathered every storm. "My mother always said that the day she met my father was the day her life truly began," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "She taught us that it is never too late to start over, that courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite it. And she showed us, every single day, what real love looks like." The ranch stayed in the family for generations after, and Katherine and Thomas's story became part of family lore, told and retold to each new generation. The original suitcase Katherine had carried to Bentonville was kept in a place of honor, a reminder of where it all started, of the journey that led to everything else. And if you visit that ranch today, if you stand on the hill where Katherine and Thomas are buried and look out over the rolling Arkansas landscape, you can almost feel them there still. 2 people who found each other against all odds, who built a life and a love that lasted beyond their years, who proved that sometimes the best thing you can do is help someone unpack their bags and give them a reason to stay. Their love story, born in the Wild West days of 1878, became a testament to resilience, to kindness, to the power of choosing love over fear. And it all started with a woman fleeing with just a suitcase, and a rancher who saw not a runaway wife, but a person worthy of protection, respect, and eventually, a love that would last forever.